very good afternoon, everybody. A very good morning to you, depending where you are joining us from across this wonderful globe of ours. I do welcome you once again to another edition of the Stellenbosch Business Institute Leadershift series. Welcome to the July edition of Leadershift. What an absolute honor and a privilege it is to be in conversation with you once more. My name, of course, it is Faith Mangope, and it is an absolute honor and a privilege to be once again in conversation with you for another high impact leadership. And I mean that, and when I say to you, going to get spoiled today, I really do mean it with the next guest that I'm about to announce to you. But just to let you know about us here at the SBI, the Stellenbosch Business Institute, really, we are just beyond a business school. We've partnered with organizations and leaders on transformative journeys from learning to leading. We also co-create meaningful leadership and lasting impact with a clear intention, helping leaders navigate complete complexity for clarity, courage, as well as relevance. And of course, this afternoon's conversation is absolutely no different to that. And the question that we ask ourselves this afternoon is, how do we stay real and connected under pressure? With the mounting pressure that leaders have to confront of artificial intelligence, which really is here, with making decisions that are timeless, that are for the benefit of organizations, for the benefit of people, how do we maintain that cool, calm connectedness during times of pressure? Well, my next guest will help us navigate this very question that I believe it can actually be described as $1 million question. And joining us this evening, well, this afternoon, is Andisa Leba. She is a multi-award winning HR Pan-Africanist Catalyst Connector, the storyteller, and the co-founder of Women's Tech Connection. That is a conference speaker, rising star, and South Africa's finalist for the 2023 40 Under 40 South Africa winner as well. She's really an amazing individual. Andisa, obviously, being the former Chief People Officer at Float Place, which as a primary responsibility was to provide strategic support to the executive team and to enhance organizations' human capital practices. So if there's anybody that's going to help us stay real and connected during these pressure mounting times, it really is Andisa. Much appreciated for your time, Andisa, and welcome to Leadershift.
Thank you very much, and thank you for that introduction.
Well, we certainly are looking forward to, getting straight into it. And I think the big question then is that $1 million question. What does real look like in a time where decisions need to be made, where the pressure mounts, where there are expectations, and leaders have to really show up in ways that they've probably never had to show up before, with the unprecedented times of artificial intelligence and a changing scope of the world? What does that real look like?
I think for me, real means placing a high currency on my authenticity as the highest form of my vibration as a person. So I think before we get into leadership, I think it's important we preface that. And I think from a leadership perspective, and I'm conscious that leaders are navigating an avalanche of change. And we've seen that the last couple of years. But I think for me, leadership is also less about control and titles, but it's an opportunity to be brave enough to grow, to be wise enough to listen to others, and to be kind enough to lead people you lead through change. Because I think growth, doesn't necessarily move in a straight line, it spirals. And so for me personally, as a leader and as a person, I've had to learn these last couple of years how to let go and trust the flow of things, and how to accept that I don't always have the answers.
Well, I mean, not always having the answers is a very difficult one. And I want to just labor on that a little bit, because you'd often hear leaders saying, "What do you mean, Andis, I don't have the answers? I'm the leader. I'm supposed to always have the answers." They often say you are the last line of defense of the organization. So how then do you start navigating the role of not having the answers, which actually leads to a bigger question around being able to hold control when, from what we're understanding, it's about surrender?
Mm. So, so I'm conscious that I think different people have got different definitions of leadership. And I think for me, leadership is a privilege to improve the lives of others. And in the course of that, it's an opportunity for me to grow as well as I allow my team to grow. And so when you become a leader, you often move away from being a functional specialist to now, someone who orchestrates a symphony. And I use that metaphor maybe because of my love for classical music. You are at the center of this entire beautiful symphony that comes together, and your job is to give a sense of direction to each of the individuals who are holding a certain instrument and to bring harmony. That's fundamentally your job. And so when you lead an orchestra, you don't necessarily know how to play all of the instruments. You might be able to play some, certainly not all of them with the same precision as the people in front of you. And so it's knowing how to navigate that space, but I think it's also allowing for people to shine and for you to create an environment where people are seen, and those who are seen, that they're also protected. And we don't talk about that enough. That I think we take for granted that people who are either the extroverts or people who are very happy to share their opinions often aren't protected. And so our role is to ensure that the system protects them while they're still able to express their freedom in the workplace, or to express their opinions in a way that is conducive to building teams.
What do we do when it comes to being able to have this growth mindset? A lot of people talk about a growth mindset, and we often juxtapose this to a fixed mindset. And in times where I think many of us are tempted, in whichever leadership position we're occupying, to be quite fixed and quite certain and definitive in our approach to subject matter. We often say that we need to adopt this growth mindset, but maybe expound a little bit deeper. And so what does a growth mindset actually look like? And how then do I start calling myself out and calling myself back to myself if I see that I'm no longer in the growth mindset, but I'm now in the fixed mindset?
I love that question because I often say proximity to power reveals character. And in life and in leadership, value and characters are the two things that matter the most. And so, my mom used to say growing up that, Andisa, if you want to be a good leader, you have to have a teachable spirit. And if you don't have a teachable spirit, you will never become a good leader. And so a growth mindset speaks to, I think, understanding what your limitations are and being able to accept them. Because when you can accept them, you can do something about them. And I think the ability to also say, hey, these are my blind spots and these are the things I actually need, either from a professional development perspective. So I now need to invest in myself and in my knowledge for me to show up as the best version of myself, to challenge my lateral thinking, to challenge my conditioning and wiring. Because we also take for granted how all of us have been conditioned. Our belief systems show up, whether in the workplace, in our friendships, in any space, right? The way you view the world and you see the world is through the lens of how you've been conditioned as a person. And over time, you have the ability to learn, relearn, or unlearn. And I think when we talk about the growth mindset, it is through that lens of understanding that I have that opportunity, to reframe my thinking, to move away from maybe a fixed way of thinking and maybe to migrate into systems thinking. So there's always opportunity to change. But I also think with change comes discomfort. And perhaps that's the challenge a lot of folks have in making that transition.
And on the other side, I mean, we talk here about how is it that we are able to not be fixed? How then do we start resetting our minds? So if I'm listening to this conversation right now, Andis, and I'm thinking, I hear you, but I don't know how to reset. I don't know how to go back when I'm going, forward, and I'm now starting to remain fixed in my approach. How then do we start resetting? We often speak about unlearning, but I don't know how many of us actually know how to practically unlearn, what we've learned over time.
I would say it's important to revisit the demarcation lines of what you think reality is and what actual reality is. And I think not enough of us do. I think we take our experiences as a universal truth, right? The things that I believe, or my style of leadership, because it's been, I've been taught by so and so. My mentor was, the great whoever have you, and that becomes the blueprint. And I think once you get to a space where you can revisit those demarcation lines and go, there's things that I've been taught, and then there's the reality of things. I can then say, maybe I need to pivot ever so slightly. Maybe there's an opportunity here to bolster my expertise, and I think being able to learn new and different things. I think there is so much that sits in the moments of silence. I often talk about micro moments, and I know in my life, sometimes when I do hit a wall, I'll go and I'll revisit the micro moments in my life. What are the things that I think are true? Against that, what needs to change? Because then if I don't do that, then I remain stagnant, because then I remain resolute and say, well, this is what it is. This is what you're getting. And so therefore, I don't think I need to change. But I think we all know the world around us is changing at a rapid pace. If you look even through the lens of learning, the shelf life of most skill sets, according to the World Economic Forum nowadays, is 3 years tops. The World Economic Forum called out a year ago that 70% of the workforce would need to be reskilled by the year 2030. 2030 is just around the corner. That's 5 years away. And so, so I think if we don't get into that kind of thinking, and I think reframe our ideologies, this is where I think we're going to get into trouble.
And that is a very real phenomena that we're all dealing with. I think at even a global level that you're speaking about, around how, skills are not going to be what we've termed as skills of the future might soon become the skills of the past. But if you're just joining us for this conversation, of course, we're with our thought leader, Andy Saliba, joining us for this Leadershift series. Please do engage with us. If you've got a question for Andy, please use your chat box and just type in a question. We'll be then sure to facilitate it through to Andy so that we can, whether you've got questions when it comes to being able to stay, real and connected under the pressure. How do we do so practically? What lessons can be learned? How do we adopt this for teams? How do we navigate this for teams? And speaking about teams, actually, Andy, let's talk a little bit about behaviors that are learned through adversity. And because a lot of us, they actually say that we shy away from pain. We try to easy button our way out of pain instead of going towards the pain. But certain adversities do build resilience and do build certain behaviors that leaders are needed, or leaders actually need in this dynamic world of ours, that these leaders can actually then further bring to the team. What kind of behavior should we be looking out for during the time of adversity? And how then do we extend some of these learnings and behaviors to the rest of our team?
Gosh, I love that question because I also often say we've got a very unhealthy relationship with pain. And a lot of that is because our first teachers, who are our parents, didn't teach us that. We've all assumed that we're supposed to be taught at school or elsewhere. But our first teachers are our parents. And there's a lot that we have not been taught at home. And as adults, we now have the responsibility to reparent ourselves and to redefine what pain is. And I like how you alluded the question in that we run away from it. And yet, more often than not, the greatest entrepreneurs and people who have done phenomenally well in life will tell you the magic is on the other side of the pain. And so sometimes you have to let the pain cut you. Sometimes you have to fail because maybe the lesson is in the failure. But because of our cultural and our social condition, we've been taught to always look for the rainbow on the other side of the storm, and all of these wonderful things, which are great hope indicators. It's great to have hope. It really is. So don't get me wrong. But I do think sometimes we need to sit with the pain and to let the pain cut us a bit. And so you asked the question around behaviors, I think, that are learned through adversity. And I can only speak from the lens of my leadership journey and experience. And for me, what I've learned over the years is the turmoil that I have navigated and gone through, and the hard lessons learned in that have given me the gift of knowing how to recognize my blind spots in my areas of development and to be honest with myself. They've allowed me the gift to say, in moments where I doubt myself for whatever reason, whether it's imposter syndrome, whether I just don't think I am capacitated enough to make a sound leadership decision, for me to have the wisdom to know how to sift through the data and the intel that comes from my team. There's wisdom in that. And so, whilst I may not have the answer, I have the opportunity to engage my team, to find co-collaborators, but I also need to have the wisdom to sift through that intel. And so, whilst yes, in God we should trust, but we should have a bigger trust on our abilities to understand and analyze data. And so that ability, and I think to refine that, are things often aren't really taught. You're not going to get taught these things at a business school. Some of them, for some people, are really just a natural instinct. Some people have a natural affinity, and some people, over time, you learn to trust your gut. You learn to graduate your third eye. And what leadership challenges teach you is that if you surrender to the process, eventually your third eye will graduate. But you have to get through it first. And I think a lot of us jump to the end because we don't want to do the work in the middle, because that's where the hard part is. The hard part is doing the messy stuff. It's failing, right? It's your team losing, like they trust in you as a leader, your ability, to make decisive decisions, your ability to challenge the system, your ability to show up, like in a way that is, that is conducive to their growth, et cetera, et cetera. And so we underplay I think the power of failure. And I've become a better person and a better leader because I failed so many times. There's things I've given a go at, and they've failed spectacularly, and it's not great, right? And you have to kind of pick yourself up together and kind of get back on the horse. And so I think to sum up, I think what I'm trying to say is really rediscovering our relationship with pain. But I also think to learn that we're human, guys. I think before we were leaders, we're human. And there are some things we're not always going to get right. But unfortunately, we have been socialized into the workplace or into leadership frameworks with the view that perfection is the goal. Growth and development is the goal, not perfection.
Although failure for many leaders can be very, very expensive. How then do we start mitigating against that? There are many leaders who say, I want to embrace failure, but failure is going to impact my bottom line, which means that I might have to let go of staff, which means that I'm going to have to retrench, which means that I have to restructure, and it means that my shareholders are going to start coming at me with pitchforks. How then do we mitigate or buffer against failure that could really be detrimental to an organization, whilst keeping in mind that failure actually makes us better and causes us to grow? Where is that sweet spot?
Sure. I don't think, Faith, there's a silver bullet to that. I mean, for me, from my viewpoint, nothing great is for free. Everything has a valuable cost. Is a simple reality of life. The biggest challenge for most leaders, of course, is always making the tough decisions, right? You have to make decisions often because you've been presented with data. You have to double down on your experience, and then you have to find what the middle is. And certain scenarios, yes, I think call for tough decision making. Certain scenarios call for challenging the system a little bit. But again, as I said, everything has a valuable cost. And so I will not purport to say that I have the answer to that. In fact, I would challenge anyone who says they have an answer to that. And so there is a cost to leadership. And sometimes the cost to leadership is getting things wrong, or otherwise getting things right and still having to make a tough call. All of us who manage P&Ls, have a reporting line. And so sometimes it might be that your department is performing, but the broader organization isn't. And you have to also make cuts. And it's a very difficult thing to justify to your team who have been highly motivated, who have produced and who've met their OKRs or KPIs or whatever metric you use to measure success. But an organization is an ecosystem of decisions, and sometimes it is a decisions theater, right? Those of us who sit at mancos and excos, you can come in with a perfectly pristine report, and you'll have colleagues who are underperforming. And at the end of the day, we must make a collective decision, a decision that, yes, on paper, we can justify and say, well, it was for the broad community. And yet perhaps you feel a bit slighted because you've shot the lights out in that particular quarter. So you've met your numbers, the culture of your team is great, your people are collaborating well. So by and large, you're ticking all of the boxes. But you also exist in an ecosystem, and there are decisions in that ecosystem that are above your pay grade because we all report into somebody. And so I know I haven't given a straight answer. And again, I repeat, I don't think there is a silver bullet. I think there are certain scenarios that call for certain decisions, and some of those decisions are unpopular. And and these are some of the things as leaders we have to contend with, right? Is that even if you have the perfect formula or you have what you think is a blueprint, sometimes you're the right person in the wrong system, because that also happens. Like we've seen that a lot with a lot of leaders, that you have a phenomenal leader, but they're just in a bad system. And so no amount of usurping their power, no amount of leading through the change and being progressive and all of the great things that they're good at elsewhere that can work, perhaps don't work in a certain system because they're just the right person at the wrong institution.
I just want to talk a little bit about emotional intelligence and how then do we start applying it in organizations and in teams where sometimes your softness might be misconstrued as weakness. When do we know that it's time for me to self-care or emotionally break, or allow for the vulnerability to exist within the culture? And how do I know that that particular vulnerability is starting to be perceived in a negative light? When am I vulnerable, and how am I vulnerable, and what causes the vulnerability? And when do I need to be careful that vulnerability is being misconstrued for weakness?
Yeah. So I would say, Faith, you can't pour from a leaking cup. I think that's always the first rule of life is self-preservation. Those of us who are frequent flyers or those of us who have flown, the first rule is put on your own mask before you put a mask on others. For me, I think it's important that one takes care of themselves, because you can't show up as the best version of yourself if really your cup is leaking. And I know that there's power to the language that we attach to emotion, right? And I think you were alluding to it earlier, right? Around softness equating weakness. At the end of the day, we're all humans, we're all fallible. I am the best version of myself when I pour into myself and I do the things that elevate my vibration. And I can come back into my space of work and I'm a better person as a result. I'll give you a good example. This week, so I've hit a wall the last couple of weeks, and I thought Botswana as a country is a place where I find that it anchors my energy. Don't ask me why, but it is. And this week I have volunteered to be moderating a session on reading because I'm a ferocious reader, and reading really pours into my heart. And so I've spent the last couple of days, with people around the continent who are like-minded like me. They enjoy the art, the adventure and the mystery of reading, of picking up a book. And it sounds like a simple thing to the next person, but I can tell you it sharpens my spirit so much And I know when I leave here after this trip, I will come back with a fire, because for me that's what works. And so I think it's important that when we talk about self-care, that we're not talking about it as in, the superficial, put on a mask on a Sunday and get in a bubble bath. And look, I'm not knocking it. I think if it works for you, fantastic. But I think it's so important to come back to center, come back to the things that feel familiar, that your spirit recognizes, the things that make you you. And if you work in a space where, like, that's deemed as weakness, take the time to educate people. Like, I educate people, and I'll say, look, when I hit 35 a couple of years ago, when I hit a wall, I said I need to go on a pilgrimage. And I went and I climbed Kilimanjaro, and I raised $500,000 for the first Black school I went to. And that settled my heart. I felt so much better. And I felt like I could come back into my workplace and show up better. And sure enough, I did. Because a few months later after that, Women's Tech Connection, which is the movement that I've been spearheading the last couple of years, was born. I came back, I had a fresh perspective. And I remember going, Auntie, you just want to be patriotic. I was at a place in my life where I just wanted to be patriotic, to do something good for the country. And it took that 10 days in Tanzania to pour back into me, because I love hiking as well. I love being one with nature. And so I advocate for that really strongly. And I think those of you who are people leaders, or otherwise who are in human capital, I think it's time that we give emotional quotient a better language in the workplace, that we move away from it's deemed soft. For me, it's healing. Like the fact that I can be here in Botswana, away from home, away from all the things that are distracting me. And I've been sitting in a conference room and just talking about books, talking about literature, talking about the importance of literature for Africa, right? Like these are the things that light up my Christmas lights. And I know in pouring back into my cup and to stop the leakage in my cup, I'll come back home and I can execute better on the things that I actually need to. And so perhaps this is also an opportunity for us as people leaders. Sorry, guys, let me just do this. Yes, much better. To reframe our language around our humanness and the need for us to shelter ourselves. Sometimes it's important that you self-preserve for you to become a better version of yourself. And so it serves no one, I think, for you to be broken, because then you'll get to a place where you're doing things in half measures, because then you're either burnt out or you're on the verge of burnout, and you also don't have the know-how to recognize what the signals are. And I say this as someone who has been burnt out. I was burnt out, and I refused to listen to my body when my body was giving me the signals that I collapsed at work, and I woke up at Morningside Clinic a couple of hours later with no recollection of what happened. And so, having been on the other side of this, I can speak with conviction and tell you these things might sound soft. It sounds soft that I'm in a foreign country and I'm sitting and I'm reading books and I'm talking about literacy. But for me, that elevates me, that feeds my cup, and it seals the leakages in my cup. And so I'm able to show up better as a leader.
Well, I absolutely love, and thank you very much for sharing something so vulnerable and personal with us. I think that a lot of us have got the same or similar journeys as leaders that we also navigate and we go through. And we don't speak, I think, nearly enough about burnout. And we don't speak nearly enough about the fears that keep us awake at night, especially those that are leading major teams in the event and in the looming change that AI is going to bring, and in the looming change that automation and further automation is going to bring about, and what that means for organizational structure as a whole, and how that potentially could cause sicknesses and ulcers and stomach aches because people are trying to navigate how do you deal with an or imbalanced world, an imbalanced globe caused by something that we do not have control over, unless you're those that are actually, for such like Sam Altman. So if you're not Sam Altman, you're literally trying to navigate the impact and the effects of such. But I do have a question that is also coming in from our guests as well, Andisa. So let me start off with the first one. Nadira Karim sent this one to us saying, how do you develop anti-fragility in ourselves and in others. And I think you touched on it as well regarding the language that we use, especially when we're referring to some of the times that we are in. So how do we
Mm.
develop anti-fragility in ourselves and others?
I think for me to disassociate stoicism from the word leadership. I think when most of us who are on the call, which I would imagine by and large are probably mid-career hires, we were socialized to attach stoicism to the word leadership. That you are the last one to leave, right? You give to yourself last, and the reverse engineering that needs to happen, and where the people call it the softness, is that you have to give to yourself first before you give to others. And again, without harping on and over laboring the point, because I've just touched on it now. I think giving self-care better language. I think teaching those around us, when it is that you need to take your foot off the pedal, when it is that you need to decompress. I mean, the last startup I worked at, the guys knew I had the Andisa Power Hour. And that power hour was either oscillating between making pancakes for my children, because I love cooking, I love baking, and I just find that that's like something that distresses me. Or I go on a walk around the estate for 30 minutes. I'm not taking any work calls, etc., etc. So there were things that I needed to be put in place for the team to understand that to get the best version of me, I need to pull these levers on a daily basis. And so earlier I talked about the magic that is in micro habits. So the question we all have to ask ourselves is, what are the little things that you do to honor yourself on a daily basis, right? Or do you just wake up and do you just go, right? And it's business as usual. Your alarm goes off, and you run to the kitchen. It's coffee, it's kids, and then you have a snowball effect where you are just existing. And I think we need to move into a space where we're thriving. Like we've only got one shot at this life thing. So at the very least, you might as well enjoy the high octane moments in your life. At the very least, and you don't get to the big stuff unless you do the little things first. And it's consistency in doing those little things first and honoring your humanity. And so if it is that, I don't know, you have a cadence of a team meeting that happens to be on a random Wednesday or whatever it is. And if this Wednesday doesn't make sense to have the meeting, cancel it, for goodness sake. Cancel it, right? Like move it to the next week. Everything will be fine. That if the house is not on fire, like just so I think we've also gotten into a habit of doing stuff for the sake of doing it, because it's become the pattern and we've made the pattern the blueprint. And in our ability as leaders in revisiting those demarcation lines, it's exactly that. I mean, there were times, I think one of my teams once said to me, they said, Andisa, Tuesdays just doesn't make sense for us to have a meeting at whatever time. We are proposing to have the meeting on a different day, on a different time. And I said, fine. It takes nothing away from me. If it is that the team need a little bit more time, to get together and figure things out and bring a report to me at the table, and the report looks in better shape one day later than it would have been on the day, what do I get out of holding the line for the sake of holding the line because I'm in charge? It serves nobody. And so I do think, revisiting those demarcation lines, whether through the context of work or your daily habits, is something we all should be doing on a regular basis.
I love what you said, and I think that we all need to kind of coin what you just said earlier on and let it land in our spirits when you said, what are the things I do every day to honor myself? And I think that is so profound, because I don't know how many times as leaders, we don't honor ourselves. We honor
Mm.
everybody else around us. We honor our
Mhm.
staff. We honor our board. We honor the chairperson of the board. We honor our seniors. We honor the executive. We
Yeah.
don't honor ourselves. And what you just said there is absolutely brilliant. What do we do every day to honor
Mm.
ourselves and our humanity? I've got another question
Mm.
as well, and it's saying, how do you stay open to learning and growth when the very systems that measure leadership success often reward certainty, control, and personal gain over vulnerability, curiosity, and a collective spirit or collective
Yeah.
uplift.
I think it's that argument I had earlier around good people versus bad systems. And sometimes some organizations aren't a fit for your values. And I know that philosophy, particularly in a world we live in now, where the unemployment rate is high, the market is slow. To get a job now, it's at least 8 months minimum. And so I recognize the macroeconomic issues at play, but I do think honestly that there's a broader conversation around good people versus bad systems. And sometimes we can't take the system on, unfortunately, because in some instances we really are. Most people are one check away from poverty, right? Our disposable income is dwindling, because the economy is tough. There's macroeconomic issues at play. And I think if there's an opportunity, I think to rather move elsewhere, perhaps that's the answer. And I know that answer is not what people want to hear, right? But again, nothing great is free. Everything has a cost. So if you choose to take on the system, there's a cost to that. That cost could be your mental wellness. That cost could be, the very essence of your job. That cost could be the toxicity that comes from that sort of action. And so I think each situation is different. I recognize that there are some leaders who perhaps are coming from a different school of thought that are refusing to change with the times. And as a result, the unintended consequence of that refusal is creating systems that are burning people out. And I know as leaders, we don't talk about this enough. I don't think there's enough conversations of holding leaders accountable whilst navigating those changes that need to impact the people that are on the ground. So to our colleague who asked the question, there really isn't a silver bullet. And again, for me, it comes down to good people versus bad systems. And unfortunately, I think there is a reluctance to change. I mean, the greatest gift COVID gave us was humanity back to humanity, and we've still gone back to what we did before, by and large. So we've missed the lesson in some instances, right? We're right back to where we started, and yet COVID unfortunately had to remind us of our collective power of humanity, of in the middle of a storm, a catastrophic storm, what does it mean to have a sense of community? And that's what we experience. I mean, those of us who survived through the pandemic, and those of us who have the residue of the scars that the pandemic inflicted because we lost our loved ones. We could not be there to comfort our loved ones or to lay them to rest, etc. That residue is still very palpable. And yet I think it's been such a missed opportunity. And in fact, I think it was Dr. Gabor Mate in one of the podcasts who recently said, this generation is experiencing a genocide of authenticity. And we're seeing that also in leadership, that there's a genocide of leadership, of authentic leadership, of conscious leadership. There's a genocide of it. And I don't think any one person has got the answer. I think there are a couple of levers that can be pulled depending on the organization and the receptiveness of those that are stewards of power in those organizations. And in the absence of them getting on board, we continue to have the conversations.
And I think time goes by so fast. We've got about 5 minutes left. So if you do have a question for Andisa, please just shoot it at us, and I'll be sure to facilitate this conversation and facilitate the questions that you do ask. I told you, time really speeds when you are having fun and meaningful conversations and shifting. I think more than anything else, shifting in the way that we show up in the world. But very quickly though, Andisa, leadership, and there's often been this narrative that's been perpetuated that it's lonely at the top. Very
Mm.
simply, how do we practically make it less lonely at the top as leaders?
Uh, so yeah, so I disagree with that view. I think the higher you go, the thinner the air. And I say this as a hiker, right? So you have to learn how to create new communities in higher altitudes, is what it is. And you have to have the willingness to do so. And I think the people who say, oh, it's lonely at the top, are the people who aren't willing to step outside of their comfort zone and to create new new communities in a different altitude. You know, the very construct of leadership, you can't take everyone, you know, to the top with you, right? I mean, like you hear this a lot. The real call out is the more you ascend, how do you then at the next level unlock what the next opportunity and the next, I guess, ecosystem of your support is? Like since I've been a leader, the different phases of my leadership journey, I have different circles that I lean on for very different things. Some of them are colorful by nature. Some of them are smaller. Some of them are larger. Some of them it's just one or two people that I implicitly trust. And I don't need to have an NDA, to disclose certain things, because everyone in that circle has a lot to lose. But I've had to do the work. I've had to go and find these. I've had to seek them out. And so the higher you go, access to these individuals is not as easy, but they're there. And some of them are not necessarily my home country. I mean, my friend who's here from Ghana, Rosette, I've had to have a different relationship with Rosette, the higher I became and the higher she became. Our other friend, Lisa from Namibia, is here with us in Botswana. I'm in a different circle with Lisa that Rosette isn't in. Not to take anything away from Lisa. Lisa's in a different place than I am. And I need a different type of support from Lisa than I do from Rosette. But I've had to do the work. I've had to cultivate these circles and these communities. And so for me, I think the propaganda that I don't want us to buy into is that it's lonely at the top. I think there's less people at the top for sure. But I think if you're intentional about creating your support structures, they can be cultivated.
Absolutely profound. And thank you very much for sharing. I literally have got 2 minutes left. So in the last minute that you have, Anissa,
Okay, I'm gonna be succinct.
as we wrap up this conversation, we often love here when we're shifting our mindset and shifting our perspective and shifting the way that we show up as leaders, we like to walk away with something. And as I said, when you were speaking about honoring yourself, what do you do every day to honor yourself? For me, I know from Andisa's conversation, I'm going to walk away with that this afternoon. What would you like us to walk away? If we have to say true value in the essence of how do we remain real and connected under pressure, how would you lead us in our way?
I think find the things that ignite your light, and they may be small, they may be big. I think from an individual perspective, I think from a leadership perspective, allow your team to not only just hold the mic, but to hold the power a little. So don't only give them the platform, but also provide them with the protection. And it's a massive responsibility. But before you do that, I think pour into your cup, repair your cup, any leakages that you're seeing, that you're feeling, attend to those first. And so I would almost go back to the basics of hospital triage. You have to figure out what is the bigger emergency. And if you are the bigger emergency, then you triage yourself first and then everybody else after.
Fantastic. And it's much appreciated for your time this afternoon. You've certainly helped us shift perspectives. And I know that with shifted perspectives, we're then able to make a bigger impact. So we absolutely appreciate you here at the Stellenbosch Business Institute. Really, I did tell you that we really are beyond a business school. This is really going beyond, and much appreciated for your time. It's really been
Thank
absolutely
you.
profound in being able to shift this conversation this afternoon. And this is where we leave it for this edition, the July edition of Leadershift. Of course, before we go into the month of August, and of course, I would like to implore you, stay connected with us. Do remember that after we've concluded this particular meeting, we will make this particular conversation available to you, and you also get to shift or engage in the Leadershift experience. So we will make sure that you all have got a link to this conversation. And as we also go into Women's Month in South Africa in August 2025, all senior women in leadership are invited to join the Stellenbosch Business Institute for the annual Light My Fire learning experience. It is happening on the 27th of August. And of course, registrations are now open. Do stay connected to us as well, where we are going to give you more information as to the Light My Fire. Remember, it is the annual Light My Fire experience. And I tell you one thing, you do not want to miss out on that. But thank you so much, as always, a wonderful guests of ours, delegates, distinguished guests, for joining us for another Leadership series. I certainly have shifted in this particular one, and I'm hoping you have been given the space to stay real, to stay connected, to stay authentic in a time of uncertainty and in a time of pressure. And until you and me shift again very soon, God bless and goodbye.